I'm very grateful for the video opportunity to talk about the 5C model of constructional creativity. So here, just a very brief roadmap of what I have planned for this talk. I will give a very brief introduction to usage-based construction grammar, which you will all be familiar with. Then I will move on to a model I developed for constructional creativity, which I think can also be used for constructional use in routine cases, the so-called 5C model. There will be a brief part on the similarities and differences of large language models and humans and their constructional networks. And the main focus will be on creativity, of course. And I will end the talk with a brief outlook of the road ahead of potential future studies on construction grammar and particularly constructionist creativity. So here you see the main tenets of construction grammar. As I said, you will be more familiar than most with all of these. So we know that a language consists of symbols, of symbolic pairings of form and meaning, which are stored in the long-term memory. So a word like apple is a string of sounds and is associated with the mental concept of an apple. And in the same vein, syntactic structures like passives or argument structure constructions can also become entrenched as constructions in the long-term memory. So subject, verb, object, oblique, the resultative construction, where an agent causes a patient to become something that can be entrenched in the grammar of a language and can give rise to sentences such as he wiped the table clean, or she smiled herself an upgrade, or firefighters cut the man free. These specific utterances are constructs. They must be created in the working memory before they are produced. In some cases, these are going to be routine instantiations of information that's stored in the long-term memory. So if you think of the general way in which we use idioms or sayings like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, that's a stored construction. It has a particular meaning. But you can, of course, like a frozen pizza, you can take it out of the freezer from the long-term memory, put it into the oven of the working memory, and then use it in a specific context. But of course, as when someone for the first time said, firefighters cut the man free, where cutter has a resultative component and where we hope that, they don't cut the man, but the man ends up being free, that these initial, let's call them creative uses, must also be licensed in the working memory, and we will think about the processes that enable this, as well as the relationship between construct and constructions in human creativity. Now, work by Holger Dissel, as well as Adolf Goldberg, 2019, have put to the forefront that we no longer think of constructions just as vertically related. We now know that there are vertical and linear relationships, syntagmatic relationships, horizontal relationships between constructions, that the constructional network is the constructicon, that is how our mind stores constructions. The input for all of this, from a usage-based perspective, are rich utterances in rich contextual settings. So who said something, how they said it, whether it was done ironically, who they talked to. All of this is going to be part of the initial storage of a construction. But of course, if something is not reinforced, then it can also be forgotten. And finally, at the heart of usage-based construction grammar is the insight that domain general processes such as analogy, categorization, chunking, embodiment, schematization play a huge role in shaping the constructicon. So there is very little domain-specific processes that we assume, and instead the symbolic thinking, the pairings of form and meaning, together with these domain general principles, is supposed to explain language use. Now, recently, large language models are quite the craze. A lot of people have been talking about this. I created this slide using large language models, JetGPT, giving it an original slide where I had lots of bullet points, and you can see how fleshy it is. It does have an LLM feeling to it. You will have seen tons of slides like this now. So they look very professional. If you look to the fine-grained details of the graph on the right-hand side of the slide, you will see that perhaps it didn't capture everything I wanted to capture by constructions perfectly. So there is definitely a bit of an uncanny valley, a difference between what humans would produce and large language models. But what do we know about them? Well, they of course are machine learning tools that are very impressive. They are trained on massive amounts of data. Probably everything that ever was on the internet has gone into the commercial machines. And the big step forward for them was to include attention. So not just the word itself, but also including in the vector spaces that underlie the models, contextual information that bank, in some cases might appear in context where it's to do with money, transaction, bonds, capital, and so on. And then, of course, it has the meaning of this financial institution. But if you have bank of a river, then in that case, the word's going to be surrounded by words like ducks and water and river and so on. So that the context, as the structuralists would have said, provide clues as to the precise meaning of words. Now, Boniel and Matabushi recently have looked at the constructional knowledge that is embedded in these large language models, which are basically next token predictors based on very complex vectors. So they're not trained in a way to produce constructions, but they show that low-level constructions, so substantive, give ditransitives, for examples, there is evidence for those kind of constructions, but less evidence for more schematic constructions that humans have, like the fully schematic subject, verb, object, oblique in the resultative. So that's still a bit of an open question. And as we will see, human creativity is not coverage alone. Adele Goldberg coined the term coverage as to all the instances of a construction, like you give someone a book, you send them a note, you email them the dates, you WhatsApp them the dates, and based on these WhatsApp, write, and so on, means of communication, that similar new uses can be created if a new means of communication comes along. So I can now Instagram someone the dates or Snapchat them a picture. It's based on similarity, analogy. We'll come back to coverage, and that's pretty well encoded in these large language models. But as we will see, human creativity is not limited to that. And as Katrin Boyles and Paul van Ecke have recently shown in a 2024 paper, or have argued, the large language models have a lot of data, so the input part of usage-based construction grammar is modeled almost better than for humans, because they receive much more data than we do in our lifetimes. But of course, they lack the basic processes of human language acquisition in embodied contexts with joint attention in the gradual process that we know caretakers interact with children. So think of all the work by Mike Tomasello, Eve Clark, and all the usage-based language acquisition researchers. So there is going to be an overlap. These models model something. Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, thinks that these are the best model of language that we have. I think they model some parts of linguistic use quite well, but as we will see, not everything that they do is similar to how we as humans would produce creative language. So this brings us to my 5C model. It's based on Glavinius 5A's psychosocial model of creativity. It doesn't only focus on the creative individual. That sort of very often is the focus of creativity work. In Western societies, very often there is this idea of the creative genius, and we know that individuals differ as to their creative potential, but at the same time they're always embedded in social cultural contexts and they interact with other people. There's a social component to creativity, and that's what I really like about Glavinius' model. I translated this into construction grammar terms. So there is the constructor that we have, the person that says something linguistically creative. And they will draw on their constructional network. That's the affordances they have in their mind. And by conceptual blending, as Mark Turner and I have recently argued, they can combine constructions into a creative construct. Now, very importantly, there's a co-constructor here, so there's going to be interaction, and sometimes, as I will illustrate, constructor and co-constructor will each sort of scaffold each other to get to the point where there's a creative output. And of course, they have a constructional network as well. And from a usage-based perspective, we know that any construct that has been uttered can be stored again and then can become a construction that's stored in the long-term memory. But we need to distinguish the long-term memory information that's encoded in constructions in the constructional network and the construct, which is the result of the working memory producing an actual utterance. Now, recently, two young and brilliant colleagues, Stefan Hartmann and Tobias Ungerer, have drawn Haspelmann's idea of the maximum of extravagance, and they have said that perhaps the source of linguistic creativity of individuals, if we think about the constructor, is extravagance, so that you want to talk in a way that you are noticed, that you stand out, that other people notice you. As I always argue, it's very important to distinguish this motivation for creativity from one's individual ability. Because if you look at these two handsome, not so young fellas, on the one hand you have Pep Guardiola, who's a very talented football manager and coach. He's very creative in his approach to the game. And at the same time you've got me. I've also at least got the first UEFA C qualification as a football manager. And I would like to be extravagant. I'm very motivated, but I do not have the same ability as Pep Guardiola. So it's very important to distinguish one's ability, how creative can individuals be, and we know there are huge inter-individual differences, which we also need to take into account in construction grammar, from one's motivation, what drives us to wanting to be creative. So extravagance is definitely a motivation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the ability to be creative. In other papers, I've argued that extravagance is going to be important for the propagation of innovation. Once these extravagant people find something that's new, they will have an ear for that, they will pick up on it, and they will use it more frequently. So in terms of linguistic change, they're early adopters. They're very important for the propagation of an innovation, but they're not necessarily the innovators. So if you look at the psychological literature, it has been pointed out that intelligence plays a huge role in individual creativity for constructors. Openness, that is the psychological trait, interest in new ideas, that you believe art is important, that you have a vivid imagination, daydreaming, that kind of thing. Openness in your networks, so sort of less restriction, more neurological, neurocognitive plasticity. That's an individual ability. It's partly genetic, or to a large degree genetic. And then creativity also depends on extroversion. Extroversion is not the same as extravagance, even though they look very similar. Extroversion is that you feel comfortable around other people, that you make friends easily, so you expose yourself to social context. Introverts are people who don't necessarily look for social interaction. Extroverted people look for that. But that doesn't mean that you want to stand out. If you're extroverted, you can just as well like to blend in. In contrast to this, extravagance is the motivation for standing out and perhaps for doing something that is flamboyant extra. So these are the three things we need to separate in our investigation of creativity. So this is what the psychological literature tells us are the cognitive foundations of individual creativity of constructors. What about the constructional networks? Now, a huge idea here that Adele Goldberg has introduced in 2019 is coverage. Let me illustrate this with a fairly cool construction. At this point, I always say that construction grammarians are really good at identifying very cool constructions, but we are not very good at naming them. So this is the cumbersomely named X be not the Y as Z in the Q construction, which instantiates uses such as she's not the sharpest tool in the shed, a stuck-up mean girl, not the brightest bulb in the pack, poor Billy Frisk, not the quickest bunny in the warren. Now, as construction grammarians, you will probably already have identified the pattern here. So there's a subject, and that's going to be the theme about which we predicate that he or she is not very intelligent. That's what all of these mean. If you're not the sharpest tool in the shed, someone says you're not very clever. The construction needs to have the elements be as a lexeme and then not the as a fixed sequence. Then a superlative adjective, sharpest, brightest, quickest. And it's important that these have a literal meaning. So a knife can be sharp and a bulb will be bright. But the idiom also taps into a metaphorical meaning. So outside of this idiomatic construction, if I say you are sharp, you're bright, you're quick, it means that you're intelligent. And then you have two nouns. They come from the same frame, so tools are in the shed, bulbs are in the pack, and bunnies are in a warren. There's a containment metaphor going on here as well, with the first element being smaller and being contained by the bigger one. And you can see how the adjective, the superlative adjective, functions like a pivot. Because on the one hand, it has got the meaning that the whole construction is supposed to express, that someone is not clever, by being not sharp, not bright, not quick, but also the literal meaning of sharp, because tools can be sharp, bulbs can be bright. So it's quite a clever punning construction. So this will give us the coverage, existing uses, and Goldberg would say that existing uses basically confine what you can do with it, how you can create new instances. Now you come across instances like for, not the shiniest penny in the piggy bank. Now, if you look at this, it becomes apparent, and that's why the shiniest is in red, that this is only partially similar to the existing coverage, because shiny, outside of this context, cannot be used as a synonym for being clever. If I say you are very shiny, I cannot make this mean that you're clever. And a lot of people say, out of context, well, this isn't grammatical, this is not the construction. If you provide the full context, however, it suddenly becomes much better. I mean, he's not the brightest lad, is he? Not the shiniest penny in the piggy bank. So what happens here is that brightest is used, which has this double meaning of it can refer to light, but it can also mean that you're clever. And then the shiniest penny in the piggy bank, and bright and shiny are obviously linked. And we can model this through spreading activation in a network. So intelligent is going to be linked to bright, quick, and sharp because these are synonyms. And bright, quick, and sharp themselves are going to be linked, and I use the frame semantic terms here from FrameNet, to the specific literal meaning of level of light, sharpness, and speed description, respectively. Now, bright is also linked to shiny, and shiny, through its link via bright, in this context, because it's been activated, is not very clever, it can appear in the construction through this spreading lexical activation. So it's the lexical network plus the constructional use that gives us not the shiniest penny in the piggy bank. What this illustrates, and this is a very important point that I want to sort of really stress, I'm a huge fan of formalization, and in my work myself I've used head-driven phrase structure grammar and other formalisms. But the more I work on construction grammar as a cognitive theory, I think we got to be aware that our models sometimes limit our thinking. So if we use constructions in this very formalized notion, we treat them like Lego blocks, like toy blocks that you can combine. Whereas actually, if you look at the use of constructions, not the shiniest penny in the piggy bank, it's more like Play-Doh, the toy that you can mold in different shapes. You can't do anything to Play-Doh, there's a limit to how far you can stretch it, but it's way more flexible than Lego. And that's how I think about constructions. They are flexible affordances, mental affordances. And this also means that our networks are dynamic and flexible. And for creativity, that's a very good thing. Now, how do psychologists define creativity? Because when you look at the linguistic literature, very often it looks like productivity. Whether it's Chomsky 65 or Goldberg 2019, very often creativity seems to be productivity. But psychologists like Simonton define creativity as originality times appropriateness. What they mean by this is that something has to be novel and it has to be appropriate, fitting to a context. My example always is, if it's your birthday and if I sing happy birthday, that's highly appropriate, but it's not very original, so not a creative utterance. If I want to write a new book and I pour birdseed over the keyboard of my computer and I open the window, birds will come in and pick away the birdseed from the keyboard and letters will appear, but it will be unintelligible. So perhaps something that's novel, but the result is not legible, so it's not appropriate. In a recent project, my colleague Marco Steinhaus and I, we wanted to approach this linguistic creativity from a neurocognitive perspective. And the thing that we want to point out is appropriateness always depends on someone saying that is appropriateness. That is appropriate. That seems like a very trite point, but this is important. Novelty, we will see, we can find objective criterion for saying something is new because it hasn't been done before, if we have a reference corpus. But appropriateness is something that needs to be assessed by people. And in terms of the neurocognitive setup of humans, the default mode network is normally seen as novel idea generation, and the idea evaluation is then carried out by the executive control network. Moreno, Rodriguez et al. 2024 have more on this to say. And it's the interaction of these two, default mode network and executive control network, that are discussed in creativity research from a neurocognitive perspective. Gu et al. Also pointed out that creativity is related to neuromodulators. So if you come up with a new idea, a creative idea, you get a dopamine reward. There's an emotional benefit. And we will see later that AI can be similar in terms of idea generation. It can produce strings because of its token prediction that are novel linked and original. But the emotional evaluation, that's always going to rely on humans. So even if you ask the LLM, is that creative? That's again just a token that's strung together. But emotional rewards, that relies on the dopamine system. That's something very human. This is a big topic. I can't really cover all of this in this particular talk. But if you want to talk to me about this or anything else in the talk, just write me an email. I would very much love to discuss my work with you in person. So how can we assess linguistic creativity using tools, methodologies? There is a Divergent association task. I've given you the link here. They basically ask subjects for 10 words that are as different from each other as possible in all meanings and uses of the words. Only single words, nouns, no proper nouns, and so on. And they've correlated this. They've carried this out with tens and thousands of people by now, I think, and they've correlated it with other measures of creativity, alternative use tasks, where you say, okay, this is a brick, what can you do creatively with it? That's not what you normally do with it, that kind of thing. And it turns out to be highly correlated. And how do they then assess this? Well, you get the words and you go to a vector space. The vector space model that they use is GloVe. I'll have something to say about this in a second. And they basically just look at the cosine differences, the cosine similarities between two words. So in this set, for example, broom and sea have a very low score, so they seem to be fairly similar, pardon me, and coercion and food, that is a higher score, which means they are more dissimilar in their use in the language. So they do this in an automatic objective fashion. They feed all the results that subjects give them and get the global vectors for these words from GloVe, which has 6 billion tokens and 300 D vectors. They then take the first 7 nouns, because that's what most people at least produce. They give pairwise semantic distances using cosine distance measures. Then they take the average and multiply it by 100, and that's how you get an average score per person per score, where 50 is low, 78 is average, and 80 is high. There are 21 pairs if you compare all 7 pairwise, and you could get a score higher than 100, but you normally don't. So if you see here, in this trial, someone had a score of 85.2 as an average, and that's higher than 86% of people. Okay, so this is actually a nice quick way of assessing someone's creativity. It doesn't take long, but of course it's also not a very natural task. because I don't think that any one of us has ever been stopped in the street by someone who said, give me 10 nouns and make them as different as possible. Also, from a construction grammarian perspective, what we will see is that this of course tests novelty. So how novel one item is from another one, how far away in the vector space you can go, which you could see as corresponding to your mental network. But there is no measure of appropriateness that is separate from all of this, because for this you need a contextual window. And this is why Marco and I extended this to a constructional context. So now we got carrier sentences like yesterday the woman, the hell out of the man. That's the hell out of construction, which I've worked on quite a bit. And then you ask subjects to entertain verbs that are as different from each other as possible in all meanings and uses of the word. So far in a trial we had 102 subjects, age range 21 through 71, 59 females, 43 males, all of them, and that was a filter from the UK with first language English. We want to extend this to other languages as well, of course, and to other backgrounds, but just to make the sample as homogeneous as possible. They also had tertiary education, just to make sure that, as I said, they are as similar as possible. Now, as you will have already seen, if you've got the woman in the subject slot or the man, then perhaps there are stereotypical associations. We controlled for this by randomizing this across subjects. So some would see the hell construction with woman in the subject slot and the transitive construction, yesterday the man, the woman, with the man in the subject slot, and some the other way around. We looked for demographics, Big Five, of course, openness and extraversion were of particular importance. We used the standardized Big Five test there. The Sano test, which tests extravagance, I will go into detail in a second. Then we did the DAT score, which is the 10 nouns, just as a correlation, and then a constructional DAT. The SANU is the self-attributed need for uniqueness scale. We wanted to test extravagance, and we used this as an established measure because it asks things like, I prefer being no different from other people, slightly different from other people, up to extremely different from other people. And if you look at the final one, I have a weak need for uniqueness, a slight need, a moderate need, a strong need, a very strong need. And of course, this tests extravagance, how much you want to stick out, how flamboyant you want to be, exactly what people like Ungerer and Hartmann have claimed drives linguistic creativity. The argument structure constructions that we tested were the intransitive construction, yesterday the man in his room, and the transitive construction, yesterday the woman, the man, and we asked subjects to fill in 10 verbs. You can see why we use those two. These are fairly productive, very open, so their subjects actually we expect to have a wide range of results. In contrast to this, the way construction, yesterday the man, his way to the top. You can climb your way to the top, you can fake your way to the top, but it's slightly less in productivity, even though it's still a fairly productive argument structure construction. And then the hell out of construction, like yesterday the woman, the hell out of the man, where you can scare or beat the hell out of someone. So there's the hell out is missing. So these are two prototypical clusters. We know this from corpus-based examples. So one is stimulated emotion. So you scare the hell out of someone, you annoy the hell out of someone, you frighten the hell. So scare, frighten, annoy, all of these things that have an emotional response in you. And then you also get physical harm. You beat the hell out of a ball, you kick the hell out of it. So physical, actual harm. Those are the two clusters that we find in the corpus. And it's of course interesting to see how people can move away from these prototypical instantiations, or how close in terms of coverage they stay. Now all of these are established constructions, so we also wanted something that's a bit more extravagant, to use Hartmann's and Ungerer's terms. So we also had a snowclone condition. We used a day keeps the away, and subjects had to fill in noun pairs, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, which is the prototypical one. Or we know from corpus data that sometimes people manipulate this creatively to a puzzle a day keeps the boredom away. This is how we got to this example. It was an interview with a comic.
I don't know. Avocado?
You're really committing.
I don't know. I was like, water. My Stanley Cup guy. I'm panicking. I'm like, I don't know. My birth control. Probiotic.
So water day keeps the doctor away, and she goes for avocado. In terms of coverage, that's close to apple, right? Fruit, vegetables, something that you can consume. Then it goes to liquids, water. And then she goes from water to Stanley Cup, which is already sort of a container where fluids can be in, to birth control, which is a bigger jump in the network. And this sort of gave us the idea for using snowclones and asking people to go away from coverage. This is just another example. So an apple a day keeps the doctor away. We know that there is a certain emergent productivity, but it's still not as used frequently by everybody, and it's much more constrained than the productivity in the corpora that we find for the argument structure constructions. So recently, Hartmann and Ungerer said that these constructions in particular require extravagance. They call them extravagant constructions, where you have a substantive template, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and you turn this into a schematic template by sort of schematizing a slot. In that 2023 paper, they also talk about the mother of all and X be the new Y. So we used the apple a day keeps the doctor away as an instance to test this. What were the results? Now we used a mixed effects model for this, and we measured how cosine distance, that's the DUT score, is influenced by the various phenomena that we have, and the significant variables were construction, openness, and conscientiousness. It's got a decent R squared, so variation explained with 0.48. Of which some is random effects. The fixed effects, the three that I just mentioned, explain for 23, 0.23, which is decent. Now this is the difference in construction. To the left you see the nouns. That's going to get the highest scores because it's the least constrained one, right? We're not surprised here. So if I ask you to give me 10 nouns that are as different as possible, it's easy to give 10 different nouns. You're not constrained. The constructions, which are all at the bottom, so hell and intransitive, and then to the right transitive and way. Only the way construction sticks out a bit. All the other ones have sort of lower scores, because the construction constrains where you can go in terms of appropriateness. And interestingly, the snowclone constructions, well, it's noun phrase slots, and that's something that Adele in 2019 already says, that in the argument structure constructions, these are the things that become more schematic, more flexible, because noun phrases, nouns can be used in many different situations. But we will zoom in on the snowclone constructions in a second. Openness is below 5%, but not a lot, so we wouldn't claim that this is a very strong factor. A lot more work needs to go into this, but it would correspond to what people have said in the literature, that the higher you are in openness with respect to a trait, the more novel responses can you give. And you can see how it goes up from about 77 to 81 as a score. Conscientiousness, on the other hand, that's something that might sort of surprise you. Conscientiousness means the higher in conscientiousness you are, the more law-abiding, norm-abiding, the more you stick to what you've said before, the lower the score of the constructional DUT. And that makes sense, because in language we know that there's prescriptive rules and prescriptivism, and people who are sort of big on not going beyond what has been said before, they would be sort of less novel in their uses. Now, because I promised you this, just a quick interlude to AI and human constructors. On the left you see what, for the hell out of construction, across all individuals, the subjects gave us, and you can see that beat and scare, which are the two most prototypical verbs, are also the ones that almost all subjects have, and then the rest is sort of different degrees. You get kiss and love to a certain degree, but it's much more widely distributed. When I asked JetGPT for a simulation of 200 subjects, you got a more homogeneous result. If you look to the right, kig, buck, hid, hurt, so much less type frequency, and at the same time you didn't get the same prototypical effect for beat and scare. If you look at this, you can't find beat, and scare is also not as big as for the other items. So humans have a stronger coverage-based prototype, so they go to scare and beat, the two anchors in the network, but there is also more creativity then beyond coverage, like con the hell out of the man, dance the hell out of the man, or riz the hell out of the man. Now zooming in on the apple a day, these are the instructions. So we had an slot a day keeps the slot away. And in the instructions, you will see that we asked them to enter 10 noun pairs. For example, apple day, separated by a hyphen. And the thing is, we gave them apple day because we couldn't be sure whether everyone thinks of the idiom. They probably did. But that way, we definitely made sure that everyone thought of an apple a day keeps the doctor away. So the baseline for all of the results is going to be the same, which doesn't mean, as you will see in a second, that everyone used apple a day, which was interesting. So when did people use apple in the first slot? And if they used apple in the first, there's a high correlation with doctor in the second one, as we will see in a second. Openness played a huge role. So the more open people were, the less likely they were to go to the prototype. And extravagance, the Sanu, gave no result whatsoever. So contrary to Hartmann and Ungerer, who claimed that extravagance plays a role, it is openness. And here what you see in this graph, sorry for jumping back and forth, is the fact that people who are higher in openness have fewer, don't go to apple. So the left one is no apple. If you're higher in openness, no apple. If you're lower in openness, then you go to the prototype, which relates to neurocognitive plasticity and ties in with the psychological literature. And there it's not about extraversion being extravagant, that's about ability, not motivation. This is just the correlation. If there is apple in the first one, you get doctor in the second. That's the light blue, big mosaic cell. And if there is no apple, then there's also no doctor. You can see how the two are related. And now, interestingly, if you look at the DUT scores then for the construction, for the different nouns that go into this, if you start with apple, that's to the right, then you have lower average scores. If you don't, you have higher scores. And it's important that whether you have apple in the set or not, it doesn't change your overall DUT score, because that's always calculated comparing the first 7 items, like in the DUT. But people who go to apple, they're sort of closer drawn to the prototype. They can't spread out in their network as much. And if you don't have apple, you have higher scores, which relates to higher openness because you're more higher plasticity in the mental network. There is also a slight gender effect, with females doing better than males in this test, and that is something that they also find in the DUT. We've seen this throughout, that sometimes females have a better performance, but that's something to keep in mind. Okay, those were the main points I wanted to make about individual constructors. It's about openness, it's about their mental networks, it's about how we can assess the constructional network and the fluidity. I also quickly want to wrap up the other parts of the 5C model. So the fact that constructor and co-constructor work together. Here, just another example.
And now, an icy chill strikes the cockles as we brave the frozen wastes of general ignorance. So frostbitten fingers on your buzzers as we ask, quickly, what are igloos usually made from? Yes. Blue ice? No. No. You get a forfeit. They're not made from ice at all. Made from glue. Nice thought. Is it an apple glue? Is that? No, actually eye glue. Very good.
You can see how the joke took a second. I'm going to quickly walk you through it. They ask what are igloos made out of. Someone suggested ice, that's wrong. And then if you just go by formal similarity in English, igloo, the second part is of course homophone with glue, something that you stick together. And then that's something that Sean Locke as a co-constructor offers. And Alan Davis builds on this in his network and goes like, well, is it an apple glue, an iGlue? You know, like Apple names its products iPhone, iPad, iPod, and so on. It could be iGlue. Now, The audience takes a second to process this, and then you get the laugh, the result that they find it appropriate. Remember, novelty and appropriateness is what define creativity. But it's really only after Sean Locke points out the glue part in igloo that Davis can build on this. So this shows the kind of scaffolding that is going on. And in several of my papers, I have more examples on this. Constructional blending, there's an entire element by Mark Turner and me that's open access, available from Cambridge Elements in the Cognitive Linguistic series, where we argue that the way that humans combine constructions is conceptual blending. With respect to time, I'm sort of jumping over this, but I really would like to direct you to our element and for several examples of how blending can explain how we use new instances. Just as an example, a snackcident, that's a classical morphological blend of snack and accident that leads to something that's not necessarily as tragic as a normal accident, but accidentally eating a family bar chocolate, and lots of other examples. I want to finish with AI again. And sort of highlighting the fact that appropriateness is something that humans bring to all of this. This is a picture by Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. And someone asked AI to expand this picture. Now what you got was this is from Twitter of course, and they didn't expect that, massive legs, and of course the reason for this is LLMs are trained on modern pieces of pictures, and the look that Descartes has in this picture is one that many fitness influencers have these days. So the AI sort of assumed, well, it didn't assume consciously, but it sort of predicted that that's what the full picture should look like. What I liked about this, however, were the responses. Someone said, I think, therefore I'm not skipping leg day. So adapting the I think, therefore I am construction, but also cogito ergo sum, someone said cogito ergo meter. Ergo meter is a fitness machine for the legs. And that is highly creative. And, to get this, AI used coverage to expand the picture. But cogito ergo meter is not only novel, it's considered appropriate. You see this from the likes that people give it, from your reaction to it. So AI output can be creative, and they are marvelous machines that can do a lot and probably come up with output that maybe we couldn't think of because of our coverage constraints. But the assessment of whether it's appropriate still lies in the human. And at the end of the day, appropriateness is tied to emotions and neurotransmitters. And full creativity requires appropriateness. AI only models this implicitly through coverage. So conclusion. Hinton is right. Large language models exhibit human-like properties as predicted by construction grammar, low-level constructions and coverage, and works pretty well. He's wrong that it's the perfect model of human cognition. We are the symbolic species. There's intention reading, situated communicative interactions, constructor and co-constructor, helping each other, scaffolding in specific situations. And of course, LLMs have no emotional appropriate assessment. You can ask them for assessment, you can get them to rate anything if you ask them, but there is no embodiment, no blending, so it isn't exactly the same. For the road ahead, should we enable LLMs, large language models, to exhibit this human-like creativity? What will we need to add to all of this? But there is, of course, also an applied angle. We could also look more closely at LLMs as co-creators, as co-constructors. How could they help us to be more creative individuals linguistically? Okay, these are my references. I thank you very much for your attention. I would look very much forward to your questions. If you have any, just email me and I will put my email on the screen now, but you will probably know it. Hope to catch up with you all soon. And again, thank you very much for having me, at least online, at this conference. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to hearing about your work soon. Take care. Bye.